Well, we just had some good news on the day with Micah Hanglaw going to be playing for the basketball team. But we also have some bad news as coming out last night. It was official last night, right?
Well, it's not officially official, but
Oh,
yeah, it
yeah.
was reported last night. Yeah.
Reported last night that cornerback coach Will Harris is going to be leaving to become the defensive back coach for Miami. Honestly, the biggest loss here is that he's going to a rival. You know, like if he left, there was a lot of tension building up between him and defensive coordinator Ron Roberts. That's been the rumors of, at least. So it's like it's been expected. We kind of thought maybe he'd go to Texas for their open job that they fill with somebody else. But he goes to Miami. Now it's kind of like a kick in the nuts. Like a guy that a lot of fans praised because DB room was the best it's been since probably 2019. And he kind of just leaves, I mean, and it was also reported like 5 or 6 days ago that they had worked out a new agreement. I guess he never signed it, but they had a new agreement worked out. He never signed it. And, he's leaving for Miami. What do you think of this?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's just a bummer. I mean, I think a guy that did a pretty good job in his first year between the results on the field with the improvement of the secondary down the stretch, especially, and then also his work off the field, was the primary recruiter for quite a few of the top players in Florida's 2025 signing class. Dallas Wilson, a receiver, obviously, and then obviously the top, the top like 150 defensive backs, Ben Hanks, Lagonza Hayward, forgetting somebody off the top of my head, Hilton Stubbs. Yeah, I mean, all those guys, Will Harris played a big part in them committing to Florida. So I think it's a big loss. One point of clarification, he was technically listed as the coach for the entire secondary at Florida. I've heard he's coaching safeties only at Miami, which is interesting because he was basically, from what I understand, despite his title, really mostly focusing on corners here. I think Austin Armstrong, before he left for Houston, kind of worked with the safeties, even though that wasn't his official title.
Yeah, so, I mean, Austin Armstrong was the safeties coach technically, but he was the defensive coordinator, so he focused on everything. And
but he wasn't listed as the safeties coach on the roster. He was just listed as defensive coordinator.
Yeah, but he's like, he was like supposed to, be like the safety coach. But then when he left, we did hire Vinny Sunseri to be the safety coach for this coming up season. So Will Harris would have been the corner coach.
Yeah, which kind of leads me to the point I was going to make, which is like the writing was kind of on the wall here. Even after he didn't leave for Texas, I mean, bringing in, another secondary coach, probably kind of said, probably made it pretty clear what was about to happen with Will Harris. But it's a bummer to have him leave for Miami, especially to have a guy that's, a top recruiter going into Miami. I mean, I saw, the initial reaction, Onis Konabani, a guy that just signed with the Gators in February, tweeted like no comment or something like that after.
Yeah, I'll pull it up.
So, I mean, obviously in the current day and age, because the fact of the matter is these guys that just signed, I mean, they couldn't transfer and enroll for the spring classes elsewhere, probably, because the deadline's already passed, but there's nothing to stop them from leaving. The financial aid agreements they sign aren't binding. So you certainly do worry a little bit in the current day and age about whether there's going to be any sort of exodus that follows from this. I'd say, I think Florida can find someone to replace Will Harris. I think the bigger concern is, will they need to replace some of the players he just brought in?
Yeah, I'm less worried about some of the players we just brought in. Like you mentioned, Ben Hanks. He's a legacy guy. Seems like he would probably, like, as long as we knew what we were doing, was coming to Florida with like Billy keeping everything going here. So it seemed like he was like pretty locked in with coming to Florida. And you mentioned Dallas Wilson. I'm not sure. I guess he's listed as the primary recruiter.
He is listed as the primary recruiter, and I've heard people say that as well. I don't know how big of a role he played, but I do know that he is listed, like 247 lists him as the primary recruiter for Dallas Wilson.
Yeah, so that one's like, I don't think we're going to have to worry about Dallas Wilson quarterly because of that. Hilton Stubbs, a lot of the cycle, like when he committed to USC originally and then committed to Miami, for him, like it was a lot of just like money. Like he was offering me the most. Yeah. And I mean, obviously things could change. And when Florida started getting hot is when he decided to flip. I don't know how much of that was Will Harris. I'm still worried about Stubbs. The only one I really don't know about, I mean, Otis Conan Manny, I don't really know about. It seemed like he liked Will Harris a lot. Lagonza Hayward, that's like the one I have zero clue. So I don't know how much we're gonna have to worry about players transferring or recruits. I do know like Dijon Johnson was like really close with Will Harris.
Yeah.
So that is one we maybe do have to worry about. But outside of him, there might be some other players, but I don't know if it's going to be anyone consequential outside of like Dijon.
Yeah, and I mean, guys like aren't, especially now, like guys are not just committing because of a relationship with a position coach. Like that might play a significant factor for sure, but I mean, they're signing deals, y'all. Like there's contracts and NIL deals to work through, financial aid stuff to work through. Like I don't think they're just going to try to leave just because Will Harris left, but I do think, pretty important to make a good hire and replacement. And, it is going to be something to watch during the spring because these guys will have the opportunity to portal again in a couple months. So, we'll see. I just have to see what happens there.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much this will affect us on the field. Well, the corner room, it felt like, especially with all the injuries, you lose Jason Marshall and Devin Moore. Dijon Johnson steps up. You also have Trequez Bridges step up. So I don't know how much of that, like, I give him a lot of credit and credit deserved, but then I don't know if it's really how much it's going to affect us going to next year. I mean, who are we going to hire? We'll talk about that a little bit later on. But you also give a lot of the defensive credit to Ron Roberts to help turn around this defense. So how much of it was the fact that Will Harris is such a great DB coach, or how much was it that Ron Roberts stepped up play calling and play designs? And then you also had the defensive line with Gerald Chapman that was absolutely stellar, in the linebackers room that was as talented as they come. Were getting better throughout the season. So I'm interested to see how much of the DB room, because we'll know if like the DBs come out and they're just absolutely horrible this upcoming season, the corners specifically, I should say, if they're just horrible in this coming season, it's like, oh, wow, okay, Will Harris was a huge loss. But if we go into the season and we see, corners are playing good, they're playing whatever, I don't know how good they will play, even if they had Will Harris, but they're just playing good. The defense is really good all around. It's like, oh, okay, well, maybe Will Harris helped develop them a good bit, but we're going to hire somebody else to coach the corners. Could be a better coach than Will Harris. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, I will say, too, not to diminish the progress that the defensive backs made last season, but I mean, it was still like a kind of a middling pass defense for the Gators last year.
It was.
It was just vastly improved from what it had been the first 2 years under Napier. But that still only gets you to, like, I think they had like the number 61 pass defense or something like that. So like literally smack dab in the middle of the road. So I mean, I think there was a lot of turnover luck last year, and a lot of it was, the safeties got, the defense backs in general would get burned, but they would also, force some turnovers, and that was very key in game, the Ole Miss game especially. But yeah, I mean, I don't know, it's not like Will Harris made this like an elite defensive back group overnight. It was just a group that continued to improve and did so in spite of dealing with some pretty significant injuries, which was impressive.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Like, I don't think it ever could have been, like, numerically, statistically, a good pass unit, a defensive passing unit, because of all those injuries that you suffered. Like, Jason Marshall's an NFL guy, and Devin Moore. I mean, Devin Moore's always been hurt, but still, like, you have so many injuries in that corner room specifically. So don't know if it was ever really going to end up being something that could have been elite. But let's focus on some people that we might have to replace Will Harris. One name that we've both heard about, Darren Wilson. He's the Georgia State. He just got hired to be the Georgia State defensive coordinator 3 weeks ago. He spent time formerly with the Gators, so he's someone that we are familiar with. That's a name that makes sense for Billy Napier to hire, someone that he knows. Another guy to look out for is the USF quarterback coach, DeMarcus Van Dyke. I don't really know much about him, but that's a name that's being thrown around. And a former multiple-time Gators corner coach, Corey Bell, spent time here in 2017 or 2016. 2016, right?
2017, sorry.
2017, okay. Yeah.
Final year under McElwain.
which we saw him develop a lot of freshmen and guys like Donovan Steiner, Sean Davis, C.J. Henderson, Marco Wilson. We saw him develop like those were freshmen, like, and we saw those guys end up being people that panned out to be mostly good players. So there is that. Then he also spent time here with Florida for the 2019 and 2020 season before he was fired. So before he was fired here, 2019 the DB unit was really good. 2020 it wasn't. How much of that was also like defensive line loss that really hurt the corners? Like you lost guys like Jabari Zuniga and Jonathan Grenard from the edge position. So not much pressure coming. So defensive backs have to guard for a longer period of time.
Yeah, I mean, definitely looking at these names, like some interesting names. I think like Wilson seems like that would be a pretty solid hire. I mean, was it, has SEC DB coach experience, was at Arkansas this past season, got promoted out of that to a G5 DC job. Like that seems pretty solid. I mean, Corey Bell, not great the way it ended in 2017 for that whole coaching staff. But like you said, had a lot of young players in that room that ended up becoming pretty good players later in their careers. So, I mean, some interesting names here, nothing like, splashiness to the level of what like Corey Raymond was when Billy brought Raymond on his initial staff, stealing him away from LSU. But I mean, we saw how that worked out. It didn't.
And then,
work out too well. So, I mean, no real complaints with these names. I don't know a ton about Van Dyke at USF either. I do think Alex Golesh is a pretty good coach. Like, I generally think that he, if it's a guy that he's evaluated and likes for his staff, I think that's pretty solid. But beyond that, I don't have a lot of opinions there. I mean, just interesting list. I think we'll just have to see what Billy does, but I think it's an important hire because there's been a lot of shakeup on this defensive coaching staff over the last 3 years, 4 years. There hasn't been a ton of consistency on the defensive side of the ball in terms of assistant coaches. So I think a pretty important hire here, especially because of what Will Harris brought to the table on the field and off the field. Like, I think you got to make a hire here who can recruit at a pretty high caliber because I think that was probably one of the most important things that Will Harris brought to the table.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say Chris with Bell, maybe one of his biggest downsides that we've seen from him is he's never really been an elite recruiter. I mean, when he was with here 2017, 1 year. So it's like you can't really judge someone off 1 year of recruiting. But then you look when he was here with Mullen. I mean, you go back a couple years ago, the defensive back rooms have just been bare bones. So, I mean, it started to pick it up now. Maybe it's also you're coaching under Mullen, so recruiting isn't that big of a factor for who he's hiring and how he's judging coaches. So if you come under Napier, more focus will be on that recruiting. Plus, you have Vinny Sunstory, who seems to be a pretty good recruiter, already has relationships with some pretty elite prospects. Another thing I like to point out, Gerald Chapman, there was some talks that we saw he was looking at the Bears. Yeah, it seems like he's locked in.
Bears,
yeah, seems like he's like locked in. I think he did sign his extension recently.
I believe so.
Confirmed. So we're good there. He has a lot of the defensive linemen like DeAndre Robinson, Jeremiah McLeod, and Caleb Banks. Probably other ones doing like the hashtag strike you, which is a thing that he does for his E-lines. So it seems like they're going to be hungry. I mean, that Miami game is going to be interesting. The thing you got to say now is who's the one that gave up 400 passing yards to Cam Ward in week 1 last year? It was that secondary room from Will Harris. That's what we're going to point out now. Do you have any final words you want to get on Will Harris leaving for Miami?
No, I mean, just to kind of reiterate, it's a bummer. There's no doubt about that. He, was a promising coach, and now he's coaching for one of your bigger rivals, and one of the teams that primarily you recruit against. So that sucks. There's no other way to put that. I don't think this is catastrophic. This only becomes catastrophic if there's some sort of exodus that follows it. We haven't really seen, I mean, I'm not saying it can't happen. Anything can happen these days, but we haven't really seen any reason to believe that that's imminent. So I mean, I think it just, really important hire for Billy to make here. I mean, truthfully though, every decision Billy makes this offseason is a very important decision for Billy because he enters into a absolutely pivotal year for his tenure in Gainesville. So important hire here for Billy, but every hire is pretty important right about now. So
yeah, I think the way I kind of look at it, if you were set, like if you think Billy is going to end up being the guy here, like you think we're going to win 9-10 games next year and be able to continue the momentum, this hire doesn't really change your mind because you're just like, okay, let's make another coaching hire. Look at last off seasons; they were successful hires. So it's like now he just has another hire to make. You think probably won't be the reason that if he does fail, it's not because of the defensive back coach. But if you were already sold on Billy, I mean, you're already sold out on him. Now you lose a coach that you maybe thought was good, probably thought was good at least, and now it's another fire to be like, oh my god, Billy just can't do it here.
Yeah.
I want to make sure you guys like the video, subscribe to the channel. Really grateful for everyone who's watching. We will see you guys on Sunday night, and as always, go Gators.